Hello, I'm Locke, Meredith. I'd like to invite you to join me on the next Legal Lines, where my guest is Whitney Alexander. He's a reverend here in Baton Rouge, and he's been on the front lines with the flood victims, been out there working with them and taking care of them and helping volunteers from all over the United States pour out their lives to help. He's also been on the front lines in Lebanon, medical ministry. He's been there taking care of Syrian and the Iraqi refugees, over 4 million in Lebanon. Also, on the front line of religious persecution, where he was detained in Russia within the last 2 weeks. So join us on the next Legal Lines with Reverend Whitney Alexander.
It's time now for Legal Lines Tips with your host, Locke Meredith.
Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I have a Legal Lines tip for you. Remember, knowledge is power. And I want you to know, if you're injured, Louisiana law grants you a variety of claims to make sure you're fully compensated. It's generally chopped up into several categories, the first being general damages. That's going to compensate you for your mental and physical pain and suffering, your scarring, disability, functional limitations, your loss of enjoyment of life. Also, it will compensate your family, frankly, for your loss of affection. It's called loss of consortium claim. Next category is specific damages. Those would be, say, for example, past and future lost wages, past and future medical expenses. You also have a claim sometimes for what's called punishment damages or punitive damages, typically only available when you're injured by a drunk party. Finally, you're entitled to legal interest from the date you file your lawsuit until you're paid, and court costs. So my Legal Lines tip to you from me, Locke Meredith: make sure you know what your claims are.
This has been Legal Lines Tips with your host, Locke Meredith.
Hello, welcome to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith. I'm very pleased to have on the show for the very first time a very good friend of mine, Whitney Alexander. Whitney, thank you for joining us. Whitney is a theologian. He has a PhD in theology, and you've been preaching and out there on the front lines for almost 40 years now. You're with First Pres. Tell the folks a little bit about yourself.
Over the past 35 years, I did youth ministry at 2 churches in Young Life. And over the last 5 years, my job has solely been local missions and global missions. And so currently, we're primarily working with flood relief here in Baton Rouge. And so our church is right now hosting teams of people from all over the United States. As a matter of fact, we have a team right now that just came in last night from Kansas, and their job this week is to help rebuild 3 homes by sheetrocking and floating them.
And let's talk about it, Whit, because you know, you right in the very beginning, right after the flood, were out there personally. You weren't just telling people where to go. You're out there ripping sheetrock out for 10, 12 hours a day with folks just like everybody else.
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, the first 12 days, I really rarely took a break, and it's because there were so many people crying out for help initially. Please come and help us. And so whenever we could get to a home, we would take between 5 and 15 people, and we would try to gut a house as quickly as possible. Most houses would normally take 3 to 6 hours, but with the help of a lot of folks, you can get a lot of work done.
Right.
And in those first probably 12 days, we probably were in about 17 different homes. And that was just the homes that I was a part of. Our church was working with about another 50 or 60 homes with other staff members from First Presbyterian.
Whit, tell me about kind of what you saw. I mean, you saw both sides of the equation. You saw the victims of this horrible tragedy,
Right.
and then you saw the folks who were coming in to give of themselves, whether it's labor or monetarily or supplies. Tell me what you saw.
Well, the first week, what we saw literally were people running to Baton Rouge to give a hand, because all they saw were images
On
of people
TV.
who were suffering and
Right.
struggling. So there were many people, many volunteers, many pastors. People were coming to our aid those first 6 days. And every single day that somebody would call and say, well, just meet me at this address. And we would put them to work immediately. We wanted them to get their hands dirty. And what I saw as we were taking people's belongings, I was hesitant to throw everything on the street.
Yeah,
But-
it's like throwing their
but
life away in
I
some weird
literally,
way.
in nearly every home, put about 90% of their belongings at the curb. And with their permission, we were able to do that. But I was still never feeling comfortable knowing that these were all the things that they had held on to, in many cases, 30 and 40 and 50 years.
And representing memories in a lot of circumstances, I know personally. So let's talk about kind of what you saw in the eyes and the behavior of the victims when you were first there, and that what you now see.
Literally the first 5 or 6 days when I was going into homes, people were literally frozen. They were having a tough time.
Complete shock.
They were in shock completely, and they had a hard time letting go of things that they had treasured for their whole lives.
I know, I understand.
And I know
Yeah.
you had the
God.
same thing in some of your homes as well that you love dearly, but you knew that you had to get the carpet out. You knew you had to get the sheetrock out because within 7 days or 10 days, the mold was growing. So the people that I see now, like the homes that are being worked on today, the homeowner has a complete different view.
Good.
He went from completely being in shock. I'm hesitant to throw anything away, but I know I have to get rid of all the couches, all the bedding, all that kind of stuff, whatever was on the street. Where today, a gentleman that we're working in, he literally has a smile on his face. They're putting up sheetrock, so I can see the complete transformation from 42 days ago till today.
So in the beginning, just complete devastation.
Complete disbelief.
Almost no hope.
People woke up on Saturday morning, August the 12th. One of my best friends literally put his feet out of his bed and he had water up to his ankles. He called me and said, I don't know what's going on, but I've lived here 38 years. I've never had water in my house. At 9 o'clock, he called and said, the water's up to my knees. I said, well, we're coming over to help you. And we went all the way up to Baker and came through the back way down North Foster into the Sherwood subdivision, and we were able to help our friends.
And there were so many volunteers. We've heard about the Cajun Navy and such. We need to let folks know, because the vast majority of individuals, as I understand it, in businesses did not have flood insurance.
Correct.
If they did have flood insurance, the FEMA administration you had to file a proof of loss with the National Flood Insurance Program within 60 days of October 13th, okay? You had to file it by October 13th or your claim was gone. That deadline has been extended by 60 days. So I want folks to know your deadline has been extended if you have flood insurance to file a proof of loss by 60 days. Secondly, and very importantly for folks who did not have flood insurance, the only hope they have is of course from volunteers and the good hearts of folks here and all over the nation, but also we have federal programs via FEMA and the Small Business Administration. You do have to make an application and present a claim to both of those folks, FEMA and the SBA, by October 13th is what I've been told. By our congressman. So that's very important, folks, that you know those dates.
And Locke, there are people that still have yet to have their homes gutted. I had a call this morning from a grandmother who's 76 years old that lives in Denham. She's living on the back porch. And she just said, I don't have the help. Can you find some people? And I told her we will bring some people over very soon. So we have to remember that just because it's been 45 days, it's not done.
Over. No.
This is a marathon that will take a long time. And there's so many people that are elderly, unless they have family nearby, unless they have good-hearted folks from the community and from faith-based organizations, such as churches, they more than likely will not get all of their help immediately. But people that call me, I immediately go take a look at it, and I try to figure out a way to get back to that house as quick as possible.
And Whitney, you told me privately that you've been to places that in your normal activities throughout the day and the years, you would not have been. You went into neighborhoods that you would not have been into. Exactly. There was no kind of division between folks who were in need and the volunteers given the help.
The volunteers that showed up went with me to places like Bellingrath Hills over on the far eastern side over there by Greenwell Springs Road. We went into all kinds of neighborhoods. The flooding was different in every neighborhood. If you were over in that part of the community, it was 6-7 feet high. Every single bit. I mean, that was one neighborhood where we worked on 3 homes with about 60 or 70 volunteers came to help. And literally those volunteers, they took a deep breath, but they realized everything had floated all night long before the water started to recede. So they knew then that they let the homeowners decide what to hold on to, but everything else was gently put into trash bags and brought out to the curb. And so it took literally a legion of volunteers. It wasn't just a handful. There were volunteers coming from everywhere just saying, can we help? And our church assigned all the volunteers to different locations around this community as well as into the surrounding communities. And we're going to continue to be involved because that's what I do. That's part of my job.
And what we saw and what you've contributed to is the unity in our community.
Right.
It doesn't matter your socioeconomic situation or your color. Those in need got help from anybody and everybody.
Right. It doesn't matter to me. red, yellow, black, or white. I've been a part of every single family, and I've worked with every single family that has asked for it.
We'll continue this on the next segment. This is Locke Meredith Legal Lines with our very special guest, Reverend Whitney Alexander. We'll be right back.
It's time now for Legal Lines Tips with your host, Locke Meredith.
Hello, I'm Locke Meredith, and I have a legal lines tip for you. Remember, knowledge is power. And I want you to know if you're injured, Louisiana law grants you a variety of claims to make sure you're fully compensated. It's generally chopped up into several categories, the first being general damages. That's going to compensate you for your mental and physical pain and suffering, your scarring, disability, functional limitations, your loss of enjoyment of life. Also, it will compensate your family, frankly, for your loss of affection. It's called loss of consortium claim. Next category is specific damages. Those would be, say, for example, past and future lost wages, past and future medical expenses. You also have a claim sometimes for what's called punishment damages or punitive damages, typically only available when you're injured by a drunk party. Finally, you're entitled to legal interest from the date you file your lawsuit until you're paid and court costs. So my legal lines tip to you from me, Locke Meredith. Make sure you know what your claims are.
This has been Legal Lines Tips with your host, Locke Meredith.
Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm Locke Meredith, and I'm pleased to have on my show for the very first time Reverend Whitney Alexander. Whitney has been going out into our community helping from the day he could and the day that it was needed flood victims all over Baton Rouge and Livingston Parish. Whitney, tell the folks what you're seeing now, what y'all are doing now, what volunteers are needed, and what resources are needed. Because this isn't over, like you said.
Oh,
this
no,
is
we're
a
not.
marathon.
This is far from over, Locke. And what we really need is for volunteers to continue coming. And most people are back at work, but many volunteers will be coming from all over the nation and Louisiana. But folks who come into our community that need a place to stay, all they have to do is call First Presbyterian Church, and they just need to ask for one of the leaders, the volunteers, and we will give them dates where they can come and participate. We need manpower. We need any team size is perfect. Last week we had 10, this week we have 26. So it doesn't matter the size of your team. It's really the heart. We need folks who have a heart to help other people. And so if folks can provide some resources like sheetrock and insulation and some financial resources, that'll be a part of the ongoing. We're going to continue this marathon more than likely for a couple years.
Well, it's interesting, Whitney.
It's not going to end quickly.
Your dissertation, when you got your doctorate in theology, was on all the work that you did in Katrina
Yes,
over
sir.
10 years ago, and you're seeing it happen again.
Yes, I'm learning that I might have to add another chapter of my life, the Baton Rouge chapter.
Right.
I'm a native of New Orleans, and because of what happened at Katrina in 2005, from the end of 2005, literally through 2014, I have spent 9 years working in New Orleans, helping others
And
come
pour
back.
your life out for almost a decade. It's fantastic. But let's shift gears then. You and I privately were friends, and I always notice you're on the front lines. In this case, it was the front lines of helping those in need in the flood. You're also in the front lines in helping and providing encouragement to Syrian and Iraqi refugees in Lebanon. You just got back, what, a week ago?
About 10 days ago, yes, sir.
And tell me about your experience there, what you saw and what you were able to do.
This is our second year to provide medical relief teams. And what we try to do is we try to go in and work with the local church. Noor and Rebecca Boutros are the missionary couple. Noor is from Syria. He married a Baton Rouge girl.
The Lunsford family.
The Lunsford
Lloyd
family,
and Cynthia
Lloyd and
Lunsford.
Cynthia's daughter. And they have become what we call world outreach missionaries in Lebanon. And so because of my relationship with the Boutroses, we have asked them to be our hosts. So last year and this year, we brought different sized teams. While we're there, we worked 2 days in their church building. We worked 2 more days in other locations. And during the course of this, Syrian Muslim women and their children, that's all we see. Most of the men are deceased. Most of the men never were
Because of the war.
Because of the civil war in Syria for the last 5.5 years, they were unable to get out of the country. And more than likely, they're not alive. But the women that did get into Lebanon, there's about 4.5 million Syrian.
Say that again.
4.5 million Syrian and Iraqi refugees are living in and around Beirut, Lebanon.
And Lebanon's not a big country.
Lebanon is a country of only 4 million people total.
So its population doubled,
It has
and half
doubled.
of it is now refugees.
And half of it's refugees. So most of these folks have no money, no income. So they're groups like us that have volunteered to go over. once or twice a year, and we bring medical teams. And this year we had 7 medical doctors, 7 from America, 3 from Egypt, and we were able to work with about 850 Syrian and Iraqi refugees, as well as working with the very poor migrant workers who are from Lebanon. So we had an opportunity to give these men, some men, all women
elderly
and children,
folk, I guess.
mostly elderly men, but everyone that needed attention received attention, had a chance to talk to a doctor, and nearly 99% of them received whatever they needed. We brought medicines to have a pharmacy, so we were able to give out prescriptions to those. This is just a Band-Aid, but when we left there, we also let every single one of those refugees know that there is a Syrian refugee clinic. There is a doctor from Korea who's opened a clinic.
Wow.
So if they have ongoing issues, they can go see this guy for literally $1 a visit. That's all it costs.
Whitney, what is the, I know the physical state of the folks is very difficult and very trying. Right. What is, in your estimation, the spiritual condition over there? I mean, we've talked privately about the condition of the Christian church all over the nation and all over the world. Yeah. So what is your observation there?
In Lebanon, currently, there are about 50% of that nation is still Christian, and the other half is Muslim.
And that is a huge decline.
That's a huge decline from 1980s. In the 80s, that nation was 80% Christian. And because of the Shiites and the Kurds and the Sunnis and the Hezbollah, it's really taken over most of the big cities in and around Lebanon. But the Christians still have a foothold, in especially Beirut, Lebanon. And the Christian church that we were a part of, they literally are reaching out by having services for all these women and children. And they're primarily strong Muslims who are hearing the gospel maybe for the first time. And Nora and Rebecca are on the front lines. Nora and Rebecca are presenting Bible studies, leading worship every Sunday night. So they're touching the lives of these people. There's another couple that's just joined them this month from America. So they now have 2 couples that are going to be working with a lot of Syrian refugees. And we need to lift them up in prayer. I mean, it's a big deal.
And I know most folks probably are unaware, but the Lunsford family, I mean, this is Governor Treen's granddaughter.
Yes.
Who is over there pouring out her life in an entirely different
Before Rebecca met Noor, she worked for 3 years at an Egyptian sports camp run by Qasr Dabara Evangelical Church. And during those 3 years, as she was on the front lines of working with Egyptian children, she was also training in the Middle East. Sports ministry is huge. There are 15 countries.
I guess they're playing soccer, huh?
They're playing soccer, but they're playing, we bring other sports to them. We literally bring baseball, football, volleyball, you name it. Basketball's huge now. But the funny thing is, guys like you and I go over and volunteer for a week, and we get a chance to pour into 20 Muslim boys and girls, and we get to teach them an American sport. And during the course of that time, we have the opportunity to share our story, and our story includes Christ. And they get it maybe for the very first time, or very rarely get a chance to hear about who we truly love, and that's.
So tell me the kind of spiritual condition of the Christian church in Egypt, because you've been there several times. You've traveled all over the world. Tell me what your observations are there. I know we've had the coup in the last several years.
Right.
What's going on?
In Egypt, especially in Cairo, Egypt, the largest evangelical church is Qasr Dabara. 1% of all Christians are evangelical. And Qasr Dabara has 8,000 members. But the Coptic church has 9% of all the rest of the Christians.
And that's an ancient church.
That's an ancient church. But Egypt itself is 90% Muslim. The Muslims are still very strong. But one thing, Locke, I want to share, and I want to share with everyone, from 600 AD up until 2010, only approximately 1 million Muslims came to Christianity. Since the coup of 2011, there was the Arab uprising in 2011 in almost every country. During these uprisings, people got tired of all this war and all this violence in the Islamic tradition. And they are estimating since 2011 till now, approximately 5 to 7 million Muslims have turned their hearts to Christ.
That's amazing.
That's an incredible miracle.
We'll continue this on the next segment. This is Legal Lines with Locke Meredith, my special guest, Reverend Whitney Alexander. We'll be right back.
It's time now for Legal Lines Tips with your host, Locke Meredith.
Hello, I'm Locke Meredith with a Legal Lines tip for you. Document your claim. What do I mean? Whenever you present a claim, whether it's for injuries in an automobile collision or for a breach of contract case or a business claim, it all boils down to documentation and evidence. For example, when you go to trial, basically both sides are presenting their evidence of what they believe to be their case. For example, also, if you're involved in an automobile collision, document the event. Talk to all the parties who are involved. Get their names, address, contact information, insurance info. Talk to the witnesses on the scene. Also get their contact information. Take photographs. With the phones we all have these days, everybody can take a picture and that paints 1,000 words. So document your claim. The Legal Lines tip from me, Locke Meredith, to you is document the claim.
This has been Legal Lines Tips.
Welcome back to Legal Lines. I'm very pleased to have on my show for the very first time Reverend Whitney Alexander. He is a reverend here in good old Baton Rouge, First Pres. Whitney, we talked about the sports camp ministry in Egypt and kind of your observations of the condition of the Christian church, both in Lebanon, going from 80% to 50% Christian and now 50% Muslim. In Egypt, much higher Muslim population. But the church, the big church there is protected with the 8,000 members or so.
Right. The church in Castle de Barra has been literally on the Tahrir Square for over 75 years. And so it was built with the permission of the government. It wasn't just something that happened. It's a part of the fabric of the downtown Cairo. And because of the pastor, they've only had 2 senior pastors in all this time. The pastor, Sami Maurice, came in the mid-90s. He was a surgeon for 30 years. And he was asked to be the co-pastor of the outgoing pastor. And when he came on, he was probably in his mid-40s, and he wanted to start a sports ministry. And with the sports ministry, they've reached out to the whole world. And they've spread their sports ministry to all the Middle Eastern countries. The one thing about sports, that is love.
It's a common language, isn't it?
It's a common language. People do play soccer there, obviously. But they also want others to know that the gospel can be shared. They have to do it in unique ways. And so they bring in coaches. They bring in people from all walks of life, from all over the world. And there are lots of people from even Baton Rouge that go.
And I guess in a way, instead of speaking the gospel verbally, you demonstrate it with acts of love and sacrifice.
And I've been going there for 10 years. So on and off for 10 years, we've brought teams of young men and women, older men and women who love kids. And every time we go to a camp, there's always 250 children.
Wow.
And we get a chance to pour into them for 7 days with the love of Christ.
All right, so you've indicated you felt safe in Lebanon, felt safe in Egypt. That wasn't your situation that you experienced when you went to Russia, a week later?
It was actually, I came home from Lebanon, 24 hours later I caught a flight, went back to Kaluga, Russia to be with Pastor Albert Rakin to celebrate their 25th anniversary of being a church called Word of Life. And during our time there, we were a part of 3 nights of celebration, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And each evening, we had an opportunity to present the gospel. I had the opportunity to share my faith. But while sharing my faith there was people that in Russian world, we would call them informants. But
spies?
Or spies.
Okay.
But they have folks that sit off to the side. And I didn't know what this was going on until actually later. But there was a gentleman that was videotaping every one of my words. And so
using phones?
They were using cell phones, and they were sitting to my right, their left. But on the evening of Saturday night, we were leaving the church to go back to our apartment. And I was just like I've been doing the previous 3 nights. I just go home and rest. There's no Wi-Fi there, so you really do rest. I mean, you get 10 hours by yourself. So heading out the thing, there were 4 men and a policeman that surrounded David and I and Pastor Rakin and said, "We want you to come, and we want to talk to you. We want to see your passport."
And there was no choice to leave. You had to go.
There was no choice.
Did they handcuff you?
They did not handcuff
Okay.
us. They just put us in the cars. One of the officers got in our vehicle and told us where to drive to. The other vehicle followed us to get there. And when we got there, they separated us after a little bit. They talked to David for a number of about 2 hours. He didn't
Without
really
you present. You're by yourself, stuck in a room?
I was in the room. I was in another room by myself with some 3 guys watching me. And so while I was off, I was writing down everything I could think of that maybe had happened in the last hour. And David was just answering questions. And finally they brought us back together because they did bring in a translator, someone who could actually
communicate.
But she was having difficulty with English language, even though she did understand some English. They had some issues with some of the questioning. David said things to them and they were not moving very fast. And so I don't want to...
So how long were y'all detained?
We were detained for about 5 hours. We were in this police station, this little tiny police station.
In separate rooms
for
5 hours.
But together at the end.
Okay.
We got back together. They finally let Elena, which is the pastor's wife, come in and interpret our answers. The gentleman who was asking the questions was not getting the answers. And so Elena came in and she helped to translate. They wrote this charge up for us. They had us sign it.
Did you know what it was? Did they explain it to you?
They did explain it. They said that I had the incorrect visa. I had a tourist visa, which meant you could participate in all kinds of tourist things in Russia. But if you're going to go to a religious service and participate, then you need to have a humanitarian visa, which is a work visa.
Can you pray without that work visa?
I would imagine you could pray without it, but I knew that I was a part of a religious ceremony. So I did not, when the chief, the lieutenant colonel walked in, I did not. If he said, the first thing he said to me, Locke, was, "Do you trust me?" That was the first guy to speak in English. I said, "Yes, I trust you." And he said, "Good, let me look at your charges." And after looking at the charges, he says, "Martin Whitney Alexander, I want to tell you your sentence. You're being fined 3,000 rubles. And I was quickly imagining, what is 3,000 rubles? It really was just a slap on the wrist, but it was making a statement that, hey, you did break one of our rules.
Well, it also makes the statement that the minute you landed in Russia, they had targeted you to watch as an American citizen and follow around and videotape.
And I believe they also have targeted Word of Life Church for 20 years, 25 years.
And why would they do that?
Because Albert Ratkin goes to court every single month to save his property from being confiscated by the government.
Why do they want his property?
I think it's because it's in an incredible location, but also I also think that the government is working hard to stamp out Christianity.
Now, you hear and read about the Russian Orthodox Church, and as I understand it, President Putin's 100% behind those guys.
That is the government church.
Okay, so it's state-sponsored religion.
Correct. The Russian Orthodox Church is sponsored by the government of Russia.
So unless you belong to that church, you're targeted. And boy, if you're an American...
Locke, there are thousands of Protestant churches in Russia. We had dinner with the Archbishop of Russia who came to Kaluga to celebrate with us. And he told us what the new law is. The new law forbids you to go outside the church. The new law forbids you to have home Bible studies. If you go outside the church and proclaim Jesus Christ, and the authorities see it, you will be arrested. If you have a home Bible study and they find out about it, you will be arrested. There have already been, in the first 2 months of the new law, a handful of Christian men who have been arrested for preaching Jesus.
Good gosh.
In their own homes.
Private homes.
In their private homes. And so they are making a statement.
That means they got spies in the home, the group of folks sitting in the home.
There are probably informants everywhere. Spies, if you want to use that word. But yes, they are trying to find out who is breaking the new law. The new law just came into effect. And this archbishop who shared about the new law said, "I'm on the religious council with Putin." And he said to us over dinner, "I'll probably be the first one to be arrested." Well, unbeknownst to us in that dinner conversation, as we left the church,
they arrested.
We had the opportunity to visit the local prison.
Whitney, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure to have you on the show. This is Locke Meredith for Legal Lines. My special guest, Reverend Whitney Alexander. Thank you for being with us.